Hello again, rail fans. In this episode, I'm combining two separate trips I took from Tampa to North Florida and back in the winter of 2023. Now, I'm merging these trips because it took 2 tries up there and back to get enough action to make what I thought would be an interesting video. Now, through the miracle of editing, the story plays like one big trip. But I wanted to explain to you how I created this episode and why we kind of jump around sometimes. We take a couple of pretty big side trips that are not exactly rail related. I try to keep you updated along the way so you know where you are, and hopefully this will give you enough ideas. It will enable you to plan your own route up the big CSX S line in Florida this winter or maybe next. So let's go. January and February in Florida have a high number of beautiful days, and it's important to make an early start so you don't miss a minute of them. Out of Tampa, you got to head east about 15 miles to reach the north-south leg of the S-Line. For me, Plant City is often the first stop. The radio has told me that I'm already in a race with the southbound freight. I prefer to be at the Diamond in downtown Plant City, but there's time pressure against me, so the second choice is the cemetery on West Spencer Street. Here we're only a quarter mile off of Interstate 4, so it'll be a quick one. As I get set up, morning is breaking. The street lights are out. The crossing signal activation, normally the first thing to break the silence, this morning does not. Bell not working. Fortunately, M441 has a bell and a horn to give us ample warning of its approach. Led by a GE ES44AC with an old AC 4400 CW trailing, M441 is daily overnight freight service from Waycross, Georgia to Tampa, Florida. This is one of my favorite trains because of the variety of stuff he carries. Covered hoppers of aggregates, center beam flats with building materials, covered flat cars with newly made steel, tank cars with chemicals, box cars with finished goods, empty Tropicana juice cars, then another AC 4400 CW retrofitted with DP controls, and finally loaded auto racks, new cars for the Tampa market. After which, the crossing gates silently return to their upright position. The lights switch off until the next train comes through. After 441, I'm back on the road, headed north on State Road 39, following the S-Line toward Vitus Junction, Dade City, and Wildwood. On the old Lakeland Highway, running next to the main line, it's nice to see some cattle ranches still withstanding pressure to sell out to developers. It's bright sun and blue sky by the time I roll into Dade City, and hearing nothing on the radio, I turn off to McDonald's for some coffee. The radio was still quiet as I eased on into Wildwood, over the State Road 44 viaduct, and back down onto US 301 into the downtown. I turn off behind Holly's Beauty Supply and roll up on the big cantilever signal for Wildwood. By this time, the radio was crackling with something out there, though unintelligible, but I had a good idea who it might be. On trip number 1 of this episode, my son Robert and I took the same route on a chilly Saturday morning and stopped in a parking lot just south of the Wildwood Depot. About 10 a.m., down came M453, daily freight service out of Waycross, Georgia. Running through Wildwood like a passenger train, he's headed for Miami after stopping at Lakeland. They're close to the Oxford Wayside radio, so he takes this chance to call and arrange ground transport at Lakeland.
This is XAM 5318 JA, over.
R453, over.
Sir, want to check with you and see if you can order some bus, take us to the hotel, over.
Yeah, I'll get you right, over.
Okay, thank you.
Just take dispatch route.
M453 usually has everything in the book in the consist. Potash loads for the vegetable, sod, and sugarcane fields in South Florida. Covered hoppers, rock gonds, tank cars, and loaded auto racks on the bottom. These used to ride in dedicated auto rack unit trains, but Precision Scheduled Railroading has relegated them to regular freight service. And look at this, those auto racks are not on the bottom. There's more mixed freight back there. There are lots of construction containers and dumpsters around the station area, so I had to get next to the guardrail to shoot this one. M453 has become about the most dependable daylight train on the Florida S-Line these days. All the construction at Wildwood is happening on the old Wildwood SAL passenger station. I thought this place was slated for demolition to be replaced by one of those little prefab structures trucked in, but nope. CSX is rehabilitating the old 1940s-era Seaboard station with new windows, air conditioning, and paint inside and out. Wildwood has once again become a base for crews and signal maintainers, and the yard has become a useful drop-off point for CSX's block-swapping philosophy. It's nice to see something like this being preserved and used instead of demolished for convenience. It seems that Wildwood Station, like old Baldwin Yard, will just not retire quietly. We then moved out of Wildwood and up to the next siding north. At Summerfield, we did not see any trains or even good signals, just a lot of new cross ties stacked beside the track. And I did notice these green paint marks on the rails. I never figured it out on this trip, but when I came back through 4 weeks later in February, there were the green marks, and under each one was a brand new tie. Mystery solved. Now the yellow tie is a different thing altogether. On the CSX, the yellow tie marks a clearance point, usually near switches in a siding or on yard tracks. My friend Del Cobb tells me this basically lets a crew know how close to the switch they can leave a car without fouling the other track. The yellow tie is usually painted where the adjacent tracks hit 14 feet apart, center to center. We'll take a little break here, then we'll keep pushing northward. Pushing northward now, on our next stop was Ocala. Since they put up a fence at the Ocala passenger station, my preferred Ocala spot is west of there half a block at the signal maintainer's office. This is an old SAL or SCL era building, maybe a freight depot. We weren't here long before a southbound came around the curve and into town. It's L743, L for local, but this local originates at Brown Sand, Georgia, up on the Fitzgerald Sub near Manchester, and runs roughly 415 miles south to Winston, Florida. That's a heck of a local. It's supposed to be all rock, but this one had potash hoppers on the head end. No doubt those were picked up somewhere along the way, as this train is scheduled to stop and work Waycross and Baldwin, as well as Wildwood. On my second trip here, I got a B207 northbound at the same spot in Ocala. B207 is unit phosphate loads out of Mulberry, Florida in the Bone Valley and bound for Cicero, Illinois, Chicago. We're starting to see some unit trains creep back in on the schedule, well under the Precision Scheduled Railroad radar. this second trip, I ran into a couple of fans of the channel, Josh Kane and his son Hudson Kane. They were up from the Orlando area and doing the same thing as me, chasing the S-line on this near-perfect Saturday. On trip number 1, Rob and I left Ocala northbound. Then he asked if we could make a side excursion, so we drove east on Silver Springs Boulevard until it became State Road 40, then up roads that didn't have much of anything on them through miles and miles of woods in the Ocala National Forest, until we turned off into a boys' ranch I'd never heard of. Why are we going to the boys' ranch? We didn't go to the boys' ranch. Instead, we eased up a tiny dirt road and came out into a clearing and a stunning discovery. This was the reason for Maritime Captain Rob's side trip, the Buckman Lock. This is the Cross-Florida Barge Canal, in operation, well, sort of. The canal was a maritime project started way back in 1933 and was intended to be a shortcut for shallow draft shipping traffic across the Florida peninsula between the Atlantic and the Gulf. Underfunded, they soon ran out of money in 1936 and work stopped. It started again in the 1940s, stopped, and started again in the 1960s, and was stopped for good in 1971 when environmental activists convinced President Richard Nixon to kill the project once and for all. Part of the waterway that was built is still here. The canal comes off the St. Johns River near Satsuma and goes through this lock. Recreational boat traffic uses the Buckman Lock to reach the Rodman Reservoir and Lake Ocklawaha. And this is all new to me. It's remarkable to discover something this major in your own backyard that you never knew was here. As we left to get back to the railroad, we took the State Road 19 high bridge over the canal. It's an impressive landmark, especially for being in the middle of the wilderness. I had heard about the Rodman Dam almost my whole life, but I didn't quite know why. So we headed down there to see it. Rodman Dam, now renamed Kirkpatrick Dam, is steeped in controversy because many locals in the area would prefer that the original Ocklawaha River Valley be restored to its unspoiled state, like it was before the dam and the Rodman Reservoir were built. The only problem is the lake created by the dam contains some of the best bass fishing in the USA. Anglers come from the world over just to fish Lake Ocklawaha and the Rodman Reservoir. But the river people are passionate about seeing the removal of the dam and the restoration of the river, so this story may not be over. And here's one final part of this story. On trip number 2, I stopped at a spot near Santos on US 301 at a place called The Island. In this now wooded median, 4 piers, built in the 1930s, still stand. They were intended to carry US 301 over the barge canal, which would be dug underneath. Their 1930s design is pretty recognizable. I can remember passing this place as a kid in the early 70s, when there were no trees around them then. I asked my dad what happened, why there was no bridge here. They just ran out of money, he answered, and that's exactly what happened. Rob and I headed back for civilization and the S-line, but things were pretty quiet on the railroad now, and we were losing our light. So we stopped for dinner. We've been out here all day, and we got as far as Loch Lusa here. So we pulled off the road. We're going to have some dinner, and we're going to make a little dinner that I call the Executive Hobo. It's a can of Bush's original baked beans and 2 filet mignon steaks. Here's what we do. Just open up yourself a can of beans. Put this straight on the fire, just like so. Turn it down a little bit, let that warm up. With a camp stove, you cook the beans right in the can over low heat. You don't want to set the label on fire. A little salt and pepper for the steaks, but Rob says hold off on the pepper.
Salt only to start. No pepper.
No pepper?
No. If you put pepper on before you put it in the skillet, pepper will burn and give you a burn taste. Pepper after it's cooked.
If we do by chance get a train here, we're in a good spot for it, 40 feet from the track. This is the boat ramp at Loch Lusa, and it's a perfect afternoon shot. It's a beautiful afternoon on Lake Loch Lusa, if a little chilly, about 41 degrees with a 15-mile-an-hour breeze out of the west. Rob's got the steaks in the skillet now. So far, so good. And after about 4 minutes on each side...
All right, our steaks are done, or as done as we're gonna cook them.
What are you gonna do now?
We're gonna let them rest.
Rob had smuggled in a few shrimp from home, so it'll be surf and turf on the S-line tonight. And just as he got everything plated and ready to eat, I believe this was M852 coming up from Miami, Winston, and Wildwood. I couldn't be sure because we didn't hear him on the radio. I'm shooting this with Rob's iPhone 14 Pro, and although you can't tell here, it's way after sundown and almost dark. The phone has gained up to compensate. Looks like the middle of the day. After this beast was clear of Loch Lusa, we got back to enjoying the executive hobo dinner. Then packed up and headed for Tampa. But this story isn't quite over. On trip number 2, I'd been waiting in Wildwood for more than an hour in the afternoon when Lakeland Rail fan Josh Kentner posted a Facebook heads-up about an M852 leaving Winston Yard northbound. It was already 16:30. It would take an hour or more for 852 to make it even to Dade City. I was racing the sunset now, so I had to run south to meet the train if I was going to catch him in any daylight at all. Pipeline construction on US 301 slowed me down, and I barely made it to Owensboro in time.
CFX detector, milepost 825.9, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axles 460.
M852 is actually the old M452, reassembled for some reason. He's also not super long tonight, 460 axles, 112 cars. I still had about 15 or 20 minutes of sunlight left, but I was all out of trains, so that was it for this Saturday. Now, I already know what you're going to ask, and the answer is the steaks were incredible. Very few things beat a good steak cooked outside by a mainline railroad on a cool, crisp Florida winter evening. So that was great. Even the beans were great. Now hit that like button if you like this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. Write your comments in the comments section down below. I read them all, and I try to reply as many as I can. And let's make plans to meet up again, just like this, somewhere out there on the high iron. And until we do, this is Danny Harmon, out.